Hello all, thank you for watching my latest video. Today I've got my original BBC Micro. This is the computer that my parents bought me in 1983. So this is a different machine to the BBC Micro that I had the last time I did this little job. What I'm going to do today is I'm going to get audio out of the computer into a socket that you can then plug into any kind of recording device, effects units, anything you like really. But I'm going to do this a slightly more elegant way, I feel, than the way I did it last time. Last time, you may remember, I fitted a jack socket into the back of the computer and just wired the speaker through the jack socket, and when you plug the jack lead in, it will disable the speaker and you'll get audio out the jack socket. This time I'm going to do it slightly differently. Now, on the back of the BBC Micro, you've got this socket here called UHF out. Now, this was used, as most of you will know, for plugging into a domestic television set. You plug this essentially into the aerial socket and then tune it into usually number 36, and that way you can get your computer on your telly. Now, most people these days will either use the composite video out, which is normally one of these BNC connectors, although you'd normally use a little adapter to make it a phono to be a bit more standard, or you can use the RGB output. Now these days I've got an RGB to SCART cable, and that way you can plug straight into a TV monitor and you get very good picture quality. What I'm going to do is I'm going to forfeit this socket here, and we're going to wire that out and use it as the audio output, which is also handy because it's right next to the composite video output, so you could use a long phono to phono cable to connect it up to your telly. First things first, I'm going to take the top off the computer. Now the speaker connector is actually underneath the keyboard here, so I will also have to disconnect and remove the keyboard. So I can unplug the keyboard very gently and just lift him off. Now I have a very simple master plan on how I'm going to connect this. I will just unplug the speaker for a second, and you'll see we've got two pins there. Now one of the pins will be ground and the other pin will have the signal. Now I'm going to hope that the ground will also be connected to the ground of the RF modulator, and if they are connected as they should be, then we only need to actually use one wire. So I'm just going to get my meter out and have a little test. So this pin here is the ground, which means the pin on the other side is going to be where the signal comes from. There are three things I'm going to use to do this. I'm going to use a 10k resistor, I'm going to use some wire, and I'm going to use some heat shrink. The reason that I'm going to use a 10k resistor is that generally the output level that feeds a speaker is generally a little bit too high, particularly if you want to plug into things such as effects pedals. So a 10k resistor is quite a nice way of just lowering the level and also not putting any kind of load onto the circuit that's driving the speaker. To help me with this, I've got my good old helping hand. I've had this for over 30 years now. I bought this when I first started college. I think this came from Tandy in Torquay. And you know, these things, every DIY electronics person should have one of these because they're just so handy. First thing I'm going to do is just strip the end of the wire, and I'm going to put a little bit of heat shrink onto the wire. Even though the wire's black, I'm just going to use a bit of coloured heat shrink just because it brightens it up. Tuning the end of the wire. I'm going to snip the excess off. I will then take a resistor out of the packet. I'm going to snip off about 2/3 just to leave a little bit on the end, which I will then put the remainder of in the jig. In fact, I'm going to cut a bit more than that off. Yeah, that's better. So it's approximately 1/2 centimetre. Put the two together so that they're touching, and then we'll solder them together. I'm just going to pop the heat shrink over the resistor. Now I could use my hot air gun to do this, but I'm just going to use the end of my soldering iron to shrink it down because it saves me time. Now I'm going to fit this to the board. Okay, as we determined, it was this pin here that has the signal on it and this pin that's the ground. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my cable, because I don't want to change much on this in case I want to put things back to how they were. This wire will just wrap around the bottom part of this pin, and then I will put a tiny blob of solder on it, and then the connector for the speaker can still sit in on top. To do this, I'm just going to twist a little hoop on the resistor, something like that, and then I'm going to wrap it around the pin. Okay, so that looks about right, so I'm going to cut the excess off. I'm now going to slide it onto the pin. Now you could actually just leave that loose or even wrap it around a couple of times and not bother soldering it. And as long as you don't move things around, that should make reasonable contact. But I'm just going to pop a tiny little blob of solder on it just to keep it in place. Now that's in place, I'm going to run the cable over to here, but first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to prepare this part of the computer. First thing I'll do is I'll just whip the top off this box. And inside there is the old RF modulator that we're not going to use. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to desolder this wire that goes into the socket. Okay, that wire's now off. I am going to pop a bit of heat shrink just over the end. It's actually a resistor that's connected to it. In fact, the resistor's come loose. Oh, hello. As it turns out, it had a resistor in there that was actually broken. So I'm not going to bother replacing that, but I'll just remember that in case I need to ever rewire it again. This is now free. Now there's a little sort of plastic plug thing here, which I'm going to push out. I'm actually going to cut this piece of plastic off because I'm not going to be needing it. Also, because might be a little bit of possible RF interference, I'm also going to put a piece of heat shrink over the end. But I'll run the cable in first. So we've got the heat shrink in, and I will then just solder him in place. Okay, let's give that a little tug. Yeah, that's strong enough. I'm just going to slide this piece of heat shrink just over the connector. That was a bit tight, that was. Just going to put some Okay, the wire's now in place, and I'll then pop the little cap back on the top. Okay, that's a nice simple way. I've now got the wire run round and into that socket. Next thing I'm going to do is put the computer back together and give it a little test. One of my favourite gadgets is my little Dymo label maker. I'm just going to make a little label to go on the back of the unit. And there we go, a nice new sticker to go into a repurposed socket. Back in the summer I did some Facebook Lives, and I did one that I was playing some music on the Beeb. If you're ever thinking about making music on the BBC, I would thoroughly recommend you getting hold of this book, Making Music on the BBC Computer by Ian Waugh. It's absolutely superb. It's full of very simple programs that you can program into your BBC Micro and do things with it. One of the first things I've programmed from this book is the basic sort of organ keyboard sound. This is a monophonic keyboard and you just press the keys to get your basic notes. And if you hook the bebop to some effects pedals, it turns it into something that sounds a bit more like a synthesizer. You have the potential there to type in a few lines of basic, hook it up to a few pedals, and you've got yourself a synthesizer straight out of 1984. Hope you've enjoyed this little video. Once again, if you do, please like and subscribe. I plan to make lots more videos on this sort of thing, on music and anything else that I think you may be interested in. So thanks for watching. Hope this has been of some use to you.